The peaches were finally ripe enough for preserves. I remember thinking that, standing at my kitchen counter that Saturday morning with the radio playing low and steam rising from the canning pot. 63 years on this earth, and the small pleasures still anchored me the way peach skin slipped clean after a quick blanch, the sweet heaviness in the air, the familiar pop of jars sealing one by one. My husband used to say I made peace with the world through that kitchen. He wasn't wrong. My phone was face down on the counter. I almost didn't pick it up when it buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. Atlanta area code, but not a contact I recognized. I nearly let it go to voicemail. Something made me wipe my hands on my apron and answer. "Is this Delia Crawford?" A man's voice. Measured, careful, the kind of voice that has delivered bad news before. "It is," I said. "Ma'am, my name is Marcus Webb. I'm a security officer at Piedmont Park Hospital. We found a young woman in the east parking structure about 40 minutes ago. She had your number written on a card in her jacket pocket. She listed you as her emergency contact. Her name is Maya." The pot kept boiling behind me. Steam kept rising. The radio kept playing. "I'm on my way," I said. I don't remember turning off the stove. I made it to the hospital in 22 minutes. My son-in-law Derek called twice during the drive. I didn't answer. I needed my hands and my mind for the road, and I needed to see my daughter before I spoke to anyone. The security officer met me at the east entrance and walked me to a room in the ER where a nurse was adjusting an IV line. Maya was on the bed with her eyes half closed, her left cheek swollen purple, her bottom lip split. She was 7 months pregnant, and the moment I saw the monitor beside her bed tracking 2 heartbeats, hers and the baby's, I had to hold the doorframe to steady myself. "Mama." Her voice was barely a thread. I crossed the room and took her hand. It was cold. I held it in both of mine and pressed it against my chest. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." She tried to say something. Her lips moved and no sound came. I leaned closer. "It was Renee," she whispered. "She said people like us don't belong in their world." A pause. She swallowed with effort. "She said my blood would dirty the family name." I stayed very still. I kept my face calm for her. "The baby?" I asked the nurse without turning around. "Heartbeat is strong. We're monitoring for stress. OB is on her way down." Maya's fingers tightened around mine. "There's a recording," she whispered. "On my phone. My jacket pocket. Don't let anyone take it." I found the jacket folded on the chair beside the bed. I put the phone in my own pocket without looking at it. Then I sat down, and I held my daughter's hand, and I watched that monitor track 2 heartbeats until her breathing steadied into sleep. In the hallway outside her room, I finally let myself feel what I'd been holding back. It moved through me in one long, silent wave. Then I put it somewhere behind my ribs where I could carry it without it showing, and I called my brother. James picked up on the second ring. "I need you," I said. That was enough. He knew my voice the way only a sibling can, across 61 years and every version of each other we had ever been. He heard what was underneath the words. "Where are you?" he asked. "Piedmont Park Hospital. East Wing. Give me 45 minutes. Derek arrived first. He came in through the ER entrance in a gray sweater, his face pale and creased with something that looked like guilt, which at the time I thought was grief. He was 37, handsome in the way of men whom had never been told no by the world, with light eyes that always seemed slightly surprised by difficulty. "Delia." He reached for me in the hallway, and I let him hold my arms for a moment. "What happened?" "The hospital called and said she was found unconscious." "What?" "She's stable," I said. "The baby is stable." He exhaled. "Thank God. Can I see her?" "She's sleeping." "What happened?" he asked again. I looked at him carefully. Derek loved my daughter. I had never doubted that. But love and clarity are different things, and I had watched this man navigate his family's water for 3 years without ever once pushing back on the current. I needed to know what he already knew before I said a word. "I'm still trying to understand it myself," I said. "Let's wait for her to wake up." He nodded. He sat in the hallway chair and put his head in his hands, and I believed, in that moment, that his worry was genuine. James arrived in 40 minutes. He was 68. retired after 22 years as an investigator with the Fulton County DA's office, and he walked into that hospital the way he walked into every room slowly, eyes taking inventory before his mouth said anything. He was the kind of man people underestimated because he let them. We stepped outside to a bench near the entrance. I handed him the phone. Maya said, "There's a recording on here." He put on his reading glasses and navigated to the voice memos. There was one, 43 minutes long, time-stamped 2 days ago. Thursday evening. We listened with our heads together, the phone between us. The recording had clearly started in Maya's pocket. The audio was muffled at first, then clarified as voices grew louder. I recognized Derek's sister's voice immediately, Renee, 34, sharp-tongued, the kind of woman who dressed her cruelty in the language of practicality. "You don't actually think this is sustainable, do you?" Renee's voice, clipped, impatient. "Renee, I don't want to do this here, Maya. No, I want to be honest with you. Finally. You've been pulling money from the Whitfield Community Fund for 18 months. We have documentation. That is a lie, and you know it. Derek doesn't know it's a lie. His mother doesn't know it's a lie. And when this gets to the board of directors next week, nobody on that board is going to know it's a lie either." A pause. "You should have understood what you were stepping into when you married into this family. Some things don't mix. That's not cruelty. That's just the way the world is. You're going to stand there and tell me. I'm telling you that your best option is quiet. Sign the papers Derek's lawyer draws up, take what's offered, and go." The baby Renee's voice changed, went lower, and something about the flatness of it turned my stomach. "The baby will be raised right. Without the confusion of divided loyalties." Silence. Then Maya's voice, very quiet and very clear. "You are not taking my child. Then you'll face fraud charges in front of a jury and lose anyway. Your choice." The recording continued for another 20 minutes. What I heard in those 20 minutes, sitting on that bench with my brother in the thin November light, was a blueprint. Renee had been embezzling from the Whitfield Community Fund, a charitable account that Maya managed as part of her social work with Derek's family's nonprofit for over a year. She had used Maya's administrative access, forged authorizations on digital transfers, built a paper trail that pointed directly at my daughter. When Maya had discovered the discrepancy 3 weeks ago and confronted Renee privately, Renee had accelerated her timeline. She had drugged Maya. That was what the ER attending told me 2 hours later, when the talk screen came back a sedative compound in Maya's system, consistent with something slipped into a drink at a social event. The Whitfield family had hosted a small dinner Thursday night. Maya had driven herself home afterward, made it 6 blocks, and parked in the hospital structure, perhaps instinctively, perhaps because something in her body already knew she needed help. A maintenance worker found her slumped over the wheel at 5 in the morning. She had been alone in that car for 9 hours. I sat with that number. 9 hours. My 7 months pregnant daughter, alone in a parking structure, because she had spent 3 years trying to be gracious and careful and good enough for a family that had decided before she walked in the door that she never would be. I thought about what Maya had said when she first brought Derek home to meet us 5 years ago. She'd been nervous in a way I hadn't seen from her since childhood, touching her earrings, refolding her napkin. Afterward, when Derek had gone to help James with something in the garage, she'd pulled me into the kitchen and whispered, "Mama, do you think they'll like me? His family?" And I had taken her face in my hands and said, "Baby, anybody who doesn't like you isn't paying attention." I had meant it absolutely. What I hadn't said, what I should have thought harder about, was that liking someone and accepting them are 2 separate rooms in a house, and some families will let you stand in the hallway forever. James was already on his phone, speaking in the quiet, methodical way he had when the professional part of his mind had taken over. He had contacts still, people who owed him favors across 2 decades of work, people who knew how financial forensics moved in this state, people who knew what a solid chain of evidence looked like before it went to a prosecutor's desk. "The recording is admissible in Georgia," he told me when he hung up. "One-party consent state. She recorded herself, that's clean. The talk screen establishes criminal intent. The financial records are the anchor we need those before Renee has time to move anything." Can she do that? Move them? She's been doing it for 18 months without anybody looking. She might not know yet that Maya had that recording running. He folded his hands in his lap, a habit he had when he was thinking. We moved tonight. Derek was still in the hospital. I found him in the small family waiting room off the OB ward, where they had moved Maya for closer monitoring. He was sitting with a paper cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the floor. I sat across from him. "Derek," I said, "I need to tell you some things. I need you to listen without your first instinct being to defend what you're hearing." He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Is Maya okay?" "She will be. Now listen to me," I told him. "Not everything, not yet, but enough. The recording, the fund, Renee's ultimatum, the sedative." I watched his face move through confusion, denial, the particular flinching that happens when a person begins to understand that someone they love has been deceiving them for a long time. "That's not," he started twice. Both times he stopped himself. "Derek, she wouldn't." I have 43 minutes of her voice saying exactly what she would. I kept my tone level. "Your sister believed she was protecting your family's legacy. She may have convinced herself of that. But she drugged your pregnant wife and left her alone in a parking garage in November, and she has been stealing money from a fund that was built to serve this community, and she put your wife's name on it." He was very still. "The question I have for you," I said, "is simple. Not what you think Renee is capable of. Not what your mother will say. Just this. Do you believe your wife?" The silence lasted long enough that I felt my jaw tighten. Then he said, quietly, "Yes." "Then act like it." James worked through the night with a forensic accountant he'd used on cases before, a woman named Patricia, who could pull digital transfer records the way other people pull weeds, methodically and without mercy. By Sunday morning, they had 18 months of transactions laid out in a document that showed, with absolute clarity, what Renee had done. The transfers were structured carefully, just under amounts that would trigger automatic flags, but the pattern was unmistakable once you knew to look. $412,000, moved in increments across 9 separate accounts. Renee's digital fingerprints were on every one, because she had used a remote access tool on Maya's computer that, ironically, logged both users every time it ran. She had been meticulous about framing Maya. She had not been meticulous about covering herself. Sunday afternoon, Derek confronted his sister. I was not there for that conversation. I was sitting beside my daughter while she slept, one hand on the monitor, watching that steady double line. But Derek told me afterward, and his face when he came back to the hospital was the face of a man who had walked into a room believing one thing and come out the other side with nothing in his hands. Renee had not denied it. She had said, in words Derek repeated to me slowly, "I did what needed to be done for this family. You'll understand eventually." He had looked at his sister, this woman he had grown up with, shared holidays with, trusted without thinking to question, and said, "You are not my family right now." The formal report went to the Fulton County DA's office on Monday. James walked it in personally, which mattered, because he knew which doors to open and how to frame what was inside them. Renee was arrested Tuesday morning at her home in Buckhead. 2 charges. Financial fraud, and criminal administration of a substance which, in Georgia, when the victim is pregnant, carries an enhanced penalty. Her accomplice, a man who had procured the sedative through a contact of Renee's, was picked up the same afternoon. Derek's mother called me that evening. I let her talk for a while. She cried. She said she hadn't known, and I believed her, because the recording held no trace of her voice, and the financial trail was Renee's alone, but she had looked the other way for 3 years on smaller things. She had let her daughter call my daughter's presence in the family complicated. She had never, in 3 years, called Maya her daughter-in-law without a pause before the word. When she finished talking, I said, "Your son has a wife who almost lost her life carrying your grandchild. What you do next is up to you." She came to the hospital the next morning. She sat in Maya's room for 2 hours. I don't know everything that was said, because I left them alone. What I know is that when I came back, my daughter had been crying and Derek's mother was holding her hand, and neither of them looked like they were pretending. People surprise you, sometimes in the worst ways, sometimes, carefully, in better ones. Maya's daughter came into the world on a Thursday, 5 weeks early but strong 6 pounds and furious, with a full head of dark hair and her father's light eyes and her grandmother's stubborn set to her jaw. They named her Cora, after my mother. Derek was in the room, holding Maya's hand through 12 hours of labor, not leaving once. I waited in the hallway with James. We sat in those plastic chairs that hospitals always have, the kind that are uncomfortable enough to keep you awake, and my brother put his arm around my shoulders and I leaned against him the way I used to when we were children and things were frightening. "You know what Mama used to say?" he said. "Which thing?" He was always quoting her. She had been a woman worth quoting. She said, "Our roots go down farther than anybody can see. That's why they can't pull us up, no matter how hard they yank." He paused. She was right. She was. That was the thing about my family. The truth I had carried so long it had become part of my bones. We were not a fragile thing. We had been tested in ways that would have snapped other people clean through, generation after generation, and we had bent and we had ached and we had sometimes broken in the places that didn't show, but we had not been pulled up. Our roots ran too deep. When the nurse came out and told us we could go in, James and I walked into that room together. Cora was sleeping in the clear bassinet beside the bed. Maya was exhausted in the deep, peaceful way of a woman who has done something enormous and come through it. Derek stood and gave me his place beside her without being asked. I looked at my granddaughter for a long time. She had that particular stillness that newborns have, the total unself-consciousness of a creature that has not yet learned to be careful. Her small fist was curled against her cheek. She breathed in the slow, unguarded way of someone who doesn't know yet that the world is complicated. She would learn. They all do. But she would learn it with people around her who would tell her the truth about who she was, not the version that fit someone else's comfort, not the abbreviated version, not the version with the apology built in. The full version. Where she came from. What it cost. What it was worth. "Mama," Maya's voice, worn soft with tiredness. "Thank you, baby," I said. "You don't thank me for that." She knew what I meant. There are things you do because someone needs them, and those things are not transactions. They are just the shape that love takes when it has to do something other than sit still. Renee's case went to trial 8 months later. The financial fraud charge carried a sentence of 4 to 8 years. The enhanced assault charge, given Maya's pregnancy, added 3 years minimum. The judge was a woman in her late 50s who listened to the full account without expression and then looked at Renee across the courtroom and said, in a voice like a closing door, "This was not a family protecting itself. This was a family trying to own something that was never theirs to own." I was there that day. Maya was there, with Cora strapped to her chest in a carrier, 8 months old, and looking around at everything with enormous, interested eyes. Derek sat beside his wife. His mother sat in the row behind them. I sat next to James. When the verdict came in, nobody in our row cheered. That is not what justice feels like, not really. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like setting something down that you have been carrying for a long time, relief, mixed with weariness, and underneath both of them, something quieter. The knowledge that the truth was seen, that it was named out loud, in a room where it had to be recorded and kept. That is enough. Sometimes that is everything. We went to my house afterward. I had made peach preserves the week before the last of the season, and they were lined up on the counter still, the jars catching the afternoon light. Maya put Cora on the quilt I had spread on the living room floor, and we all gathered around her the way families do around the newest and most astonishing thing in the room. Cora pushed herself up on her arms and looked at all of us with those wide eyes, and then she did what she always did when we were all together and talking over each other and the room was warm and loud. She smiled, gummy and unself-conscious and absolute, like the whole world was exactly the right size. James laughed first, then Maya, then me. I thought about roots again. How you can't see them, but they are doing their work anyway, deep down in the dark, holding things in place, finding water, reaching toward each other underground the way connected things do. My mother's roots and her mother's before her and back, through everything that tried to pull them up, down into ground so deep that no amount of yanking would ever find the bottom of them. Cora would grow from that ground, so would her children and theirs after them. That is the only inheritance that matters. Not money in accounts, not names on buildings, not the version of a family that looks good in a photograph. The inheritance that matters is the one you carry in your body, who taught you that you were worth defending, who stood beside you when it cost them something, who told you the truth about yourself even when the world was telling you something smaller. I had tried to give that to Maya. She would give it to Cora. And so it goes, handed forward, one generation to the next, stubborn and persistent and quietly enormous, like roots in deep ground. The afternoons stretched long and gold through my windows. I went to the kitchen to heat up the food I had made that morning, the way I always do when my family comes home, the way my mother did before me and her mother before her, the simple, daily, necessary language of, you are here, you are fed, you are safe, you are loved. The peach preserves gleamed on the counter in their sealed jars, gold in the light. I put the kettle on. Everything that needed to be said had been said. Everything that needed to be done had been done. Now there was just this, the kitchen, the warmth, the sound of my daughter laughing in the next room, and my granddaughter learning, for the very first time, the exact weight and texture of the world she had been born into. It was a good world, I thought. Not easy, not without its costs, but good. We made it good. That was the whole secret, and it always had been. We made it good.